A first-class ticket, 2 brilliant teenage girls on the trip of a lifetime, and a flight attendant who refused to believe they belonged. What happens when a simple request for a glass of orange juice spirals into a humiliating confrontation at 30,000 feet? You might think you know this story, but you have no idea. This isn't just about prejudice. It's about the moment that prejudice runs headfirst into unimaginable power. It's about a single phone call from a daughter to her father that was so consequential, it forced a fully boarded Boeing 777 to turn around on the tarmac, grounding the plane and shattering multiple lives in its wake. Stay tuned for a story of power, consequences, and karma delivered in real time. The first-class lounge at JFK International Airport was a world unto itself. It was a hushed sanctuary of muted grays and warm woods, smelling faintly of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso. For 16-year-old twins Maya and Jordan Thorne, it felt like stepping into a movie. They navigated the space with a quiet confidence that belied their age, their matching designer carry-ons rolling silently behind them. They weren't just on a vacation, they were on a mission. The International Youth Science and Engineering Symposium in London awaited them, the culmination of a year's hard work on a revolutionary water purification project that had already won them national acclaim. Their father, Marcus Thorne, would have been with them, but a last-minute crisis at his company, Helios Logistics, had kept him in New York. Instead, he'd insisted they fly first class. "You've earned it," he'd said, his voice warm with pride over the phone. "Travel in comfort. I'll meet you in London in 2 days. Go make me proud." Maya, the more outspoken of the two, had a spark of her father's fire in her eyes. She surveyed the lounge, a small smile playing on her lips. "You know," she whispered to Jordan, "I could get used to this. Free macarons? Yes, please." Jordan, ever the observer, was more reserved. She clutched a worn copy of a book on advanced particle physics, her gaze sweeping over the other passengers. She saw men in tailored suits murmuring into their phones, women with impossibly perfect hair sipping champagne, their diamonds catching the soft light. Jordan felt a familiar, subtle tension in her shoulders. It was the feeling of being an anomaly, a variable in an equation that didn't quite welcome her. Here, in this cathedral of privilege, she and her sister were the only two black faces under the age of 50. Their boarding call for Apex Airlines Flight 112 to Heathrow was announced, a gentle chime that cut through the calm. The girls gathered their things and joined the priority lane, their boarding passes gleaming on Maya's phone. As they stepped onto the aircraft, they were greeted by a flight attendant. She was a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled into a severe tight bun and a name tag that read Beatrice. Her smile was a thin, practiced line that didn't reach her pale blue eyes. "Welcome aboard," Beatrice said, her voice crisp and automatic. Her eyes flickered over them, then down to the boarding passes on the phone. "First class is this way." There was a fractional hesitation in her tone, a microscopic lift of an eyebrow, as if she were correcting a mistake before it was made. The girls found their seats, 1A and 1B, the coveted bulkhead seats at the very front. They were magnificent pods of beige leather and polished chrome, each with its own television screen, a neatly folded blanket, and a bottle of Evian water. Maya sank into her seat with a sigh of pure bliss. Jordan, however, noticed Beatrice watching them from the galley, her lips pursed. She was speaking in a low voice to another passenger, a woman in a Chanel tracksuit with a face frozen by cosmetic enhancement. The woman, who would later be identified as a Mrs. Covington, glanced over at the twins, her expression a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" Another flight attendant, a friendly young man named Liam, asked them with a genuine smile. "I'd love an orange juice, please," Maya said brightly. "And for you?" Liam asked Jordan. "Just water is fine, thank you," Jordan replied softly. As Liam turned to prepare the drinks, Beatrice intercepted him in the galley. The twins couldn't hear the words, but they could see the sharp, dismissive shake of Beatrice's head. Liam looked back at the girls, an apologetic expression on his face before retreating towards the back of the first-class cabin. A few minutes later, Beatrice approached them, her professional mask firmly in place. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice devoid of any actual sorrow. "We're a bit behind on our pre-flight checks. We'll begin beverage service once we're in the air." Maya frowned. "But the man in the seat behind us just got a whiskey." She pointed discreetly to a man in 2D who was already swirling amber liquid in a glass. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "He is a platinum-level executive flyer with us, miss. There are certain courtesies. We need to prioritize." The word prioritize hung in the air, thick and ugly. It wasn't about a beverage anymore. Jordan felt her stomach clench. She saw Mrs. Covington from across the aisle smirk into her glass of champagne. "Okay," Maya said, her own smile tightening. "No problem. Could I at least get a different blanket? This one has a small stain on it." She pointed to a tiny, barely visible smudge on the corner of the cashmere blend throw. It was a trivial request, a test. Beatrice picked up the blanket and examined the spot as if it were a personal insult. "The blankets are pre-packaged and sanitized. There's nothing wrong with it." She folded it crisply and placed it back on the seat's ottoman. "We don't have an unlimited supply. You'll have to make do." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving a trail of cold fury in her wake. The cabin doors were sealed with a pneumatic hiss, and the low hum of the engines began to intensify. The plane was preparing for pushback. Maya looked at Jordan, her eyes flashing. "Did you see that? Make do." "I saw it," Jordan whispered, her voice tight. "Just let it go for now, Maya. It's 7 hours, we can handle it." But Maya had her father's stubborn streak. "No," she said, her voice low but firm. "No, we can't. This isn't about juice or a blanket, Jordy. You know what this is about." She watched as Beatrice moved through the cabin, offering refills, sharing warm laughs with Mrs. Covington, and studiously ignoring the 2 teenage girls in seats 1A and 1B. It wasn't just poor service. It was a deliberate, targeted campaign of exclusion. It was a message. You don't belong here. And in that moment, as the plane began its slow, lumbering pushback from the gate, Maya Thorne decided she wasn't going to just make do. The safety demonstration video began to play on the screens, the cheerful animations a stark contrast to the icy atmosphere that had settled around seats 1A and 1B. Maya's jaw was set. She had tried being polite. She had tried being patient. Now, she was done. She unbuckled her seatbelt, a soft click in the quiet cabin, and stood up. "Miss, you need to be seated with your seatbelt fastened for takeoff," Beatrice said instantly, her voice sharp as broken glass. She had been watching, waiting. "I will," Maya replied, her tone even but firm. "As soon as you explain to me why we are the only 2 passengers in this cabin being ignored. We asked for a drink, you refused. We asked for a clean blanket, you refused. You've served everyone around us. I'd like to understand the policy." The direct confrontation silenced the low chatter in the cabin. Mrs. Covington peered over her seat with undisguised glee, as if her evening's entertainment had just begun. Mr. Albright, the businessman in 2D, lowered his newspaper, his brow furrowed with concern. Beatrice's thin smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold authority. "Miss, I've already explained the situation. Now please sit down. You are delaying our departure." "No, you are creating a situation," Maya retorted, her voice rising slightly. "Is it because we're young? Or is there another reason?" She didn't say the word, but it hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Racism. Mrs. Covington chose that moment to interject, her voice a condescending drawl. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she sighed dramatically, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "The entitlement of children these days. If you can't afford the ticket, you shouldn't be here. Perhaps you've wandered into the wrong cabin." She looked pointedly at Beatrice, a silent signal of allegiance. Jordan, who had remained silent until now, felt a surge of hot anger. She stood up to join her sister. "We are in our assigned seats," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "And our father paid for them. We are not entitled. We are just asking to be treated with the same basic respect as every other passenger in this cabin." Beatrice saw her opening. 2 unseated passengers, an argument, a delay. She could frame this. "That's it," she snapped, pulling her posture to its full height. "You are being disruptive and aggressive. I'm going to have to ask the captain to have you removed from this flight." The threat was meant to shock them into submission. For a moment, it worked. The sheer audacity of it left the twins speechless. Removed from the flight? For asking for orange juice? Mr. Albright in 2D had seen enough. "Now hold on a minute," he said, his voice a calm baritone of authority. "I've been sitting right here. These young ladies have been nothing but polite. You, on the other hand," he said, looking directly at Beatrice, "have been demonstrably hostile towards them since they boarded. I will be happy to give my account of this to the captain." Beatrice's face flushed a blotchy red. Being challenged by a man in a suit was different. It rattled her. "Sir, this is a crew matter. Please stay out of it." "It became my matter when you started treating paying customers like criminals," he shot back. The plane, which had been taxiing slowly, came to a stop on the tarmac. The engines whined, holding in place. The captain's voice, calm and professional, came over the intercom. "Cabin crew, please report to the flight deck. We're holding for a moment." Beatrice shot a venomous glare at Maya and Jordan. "Now you've done it," she hissed under her breath as she stalked towards the cockpit. "You've delayed an international flight," Mrs. Covington scoffed. "They should be arrested. Trying to get a free ride, I'm sure of it. Their kind always does." The slur, so casually deployed, struck Jordan like a physical blow. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of pure rage and humiliation. All her life she'd been taught to be twice as good, twice as smart, twice as composed, just to be seen as equal. And here, in a cabin filled with the world's elite, she was being reduced to a vile stereotype. Maya wrapped an arm around her sister. Her own anger had cooled, crystallizing into something hard and clear. This was no longer a battle she could win with logic or appeals to decency. Beatrice and Mrs. Covington weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in reinforcing their own prejudiced worldview. They had drawn a line in the air, a boundary of who belonged and who didn't. And Maya knew it was time to call for backup, not just any backup. As Beatrice disappeared into the cockpit, Maya slipped back into her seat, her movements calm and deliberate. She pulled out her iPhone. "What are you doing?" Jordan whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I'm calling Dad," Maya said, her thumb hovering over the contact photo of their smiling father. "Maya, no, don't bother him. He's busy, and what can he do? The plane is already moving." "The plane has stopped," Maya corrected her, a strange, grim smile on her face. "And Dad told me to call him if there was ever a problem. I'd say this qualifies." She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, and then his voice, clear and concerned, came through the phone. "Maya, honey, what's wrong? You should be taking off." Maya took a deep, steadying breath. "Dad," she said, her voice perfectly level, "we have a problem." And across the city, in a high-rise office overlooking the twinkling lights of Manhattan, Marcus Thorne leaned forward in his leather chair, his entire demeanor shifting from concerned father to focused executive. He listened intently, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his own phone. He heard not just his daughter's words, but the tremor of hurt and anger beneath them. He heard the story of the juice, the blanket, the flight attendant's sneer, the other passenger's slur, and the CEO of Helios Logistics, a man who moved billions of dollars of cargo around the globe with military precision, went to war. "Stay on the line, Maya," Marcus Thorne said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. The paternal warmth was gone, replaced by the chilling calm of a man who commanded legions. He swiveled in his chair and pressed an intercom button on his desk console with his other hand. "Jessica," he said, not waiting for a reply, "get me David Lowell, now." Jessica, his executive assistant for over a decade, knew that tone. It was the code red tone, the one that meant deals were collapsing or logistical chains were snapping. It meant act first, ask questions later. While he waited, he spoke into the phone to his daughters. "Jordan, are you there? Are you okay?" "I'm here, Dad." Jordan's voice was small but steady. "Good. Listen to me, both of you. Stay in your seats. Do not say another word to that flight attendant or the other passenger. Do not engage. Just sit there and wait. Do you understand?" "Yes, Dad," they said in unison. Seconds later, Jessica's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Lowell on line 2. Marcus patched the calls together. David, it's Marcus Thorne. David Lowell was the Senior Vice President of Corporate Accounts at Apex Airlines. His portfolio included the Helios Logistics account, a contract worth over $50 million a year in corporate and freight travel. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a customer. He was a cornerstone of David's entire division. "Marcus, good to hear from you. What can I do for you at this hour?" David's voice was jovial, oblivious. "You can start by telling me why your flight crew on Apex 112 from JFK to Heathrow is trying to eject my daughters from the plane." Marcus's delivery was flat, devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "What? Marcus, that can't be right. There must be some mistake. My daughters, Maya and Jordan Thorne, are 16 years old. They are in seats 1A and 1B. They are on their way to the Youth Science Symposium in London as invited finalists. They are also David Black, and your flight attendant, a woman named Beatrice, has for the last 30 minutes engaged in what I can only describe as a targeted campaign of harassment against them, culminating in a threat of removal from the aircraft. Another passenger referred to my children as their kind. My daughters are in tears, and I am, to put it mildly, extremely displeased." Each word was a hammer blow. David Lowell could feel his career flashing before his eyes. A major incident involving racism, the children of his largest client, a public confrontation. It was a corporate nightmare trifecta. "Marcus, I am horrified. I don't know what to say. Let me get on this immediately." "You're already on it, David," Marcus said coldly. "The plane is currently stopped on the tarmac. I want you to give an order. I want that plane to turn around and return to the gate. I do not want it taking off with my children being treated like criminals. Return to the gate? Marcus, the flight is fully boarded. It's pushed back. The logistics, the delays." "David," Marcus interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Helios Logistics has a fleet of our own cargo planes. We spend a fortune with you because your passenger service is supposed to be premium. If your premium service includes racially profiling my children, then perhaps we need to reevaluate our entire relationship first thing tomorrow morning. I can have our freight moved to your competitors by noon, so you figure out the logistics. Turn the plane around, now." The threat, direct and catastrophic, hung in the air. $50 million. Gone. The stock price. The board. David Lowell broke into a cold sweat. "Consider it done, Marcus," he said, his voice strained. "I'm calling the JFK operations tower this second. I will be at the gate in person. I am so sorry." "Don't tell me," Marcus said. "You can tell my daughters. I'm still on the line with them. Keep me informed." He clicked off the line with David Lowell but kept the connection to Maya open. "Girls, you still there?" "We're here, Dad," Maya said, her voice filled with awe. "Okay, just wait." Back on the plane, Beatrice emerged from the cockpit, a smug, triumphant look on her face. "The captain agrees," she announced loudly to the cabin, specifically for the twins' benefit. "He is reviewing the situation, and we will be dealing with the disruptive passengers." Mrs. Covington clapped her hands together softly. "Bravo. Some standards must be maintained." But then, a strange thing happened. The low whine of the engines changed pitch. Instead of revving for takeoff, they powered down slightly. And then, with a gentle lurch, the plane began to move, backwards, not towards the runway, but in a slow, deliberate turn back towards the terminal it had just left. A murmur of confusion rippled through the first-class cabin, then economy, Passengers who had been settling in for a transatlantic flight were now looking out the windows, bewildered, as the familiar sight of the jet bridge grew closer instead of farther away. Beatrice's smug expression melted into confusion. She looked towards the cockpit, bewildered. This wasn't part of the plan. Removing 2 passengers involved security meeting the plane, not the entire aircraft returning to the gate. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. This time, it had a new, strained quality. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I apologize, but due to an unforeseen customer service issue that needs to be resolved on the ground, we are returning to Gate C-34. We will provide you with more information as soon as we have it. Cabin crew, please prepare the cabin for arrival." The words customer service issue were so bland, so corporate, yet in the context of what had just happened, they were a thunderclap. Beatrice stared at Maya and Jordan. The twins were just sitting there, silent, phones put away, exactly as their father had instructed. But there was a new look on their faces. Not fear, not anger. It was a look of quiet, earth-shattering vindication. Beatrice's blood ran cold. She felt a primal sense of dread, the kind an animal feels just before the trap springs shut. What had they done? Who had they called? The plane docked with the gate with a solid thud. The engine spooled down into silence. And then, the cabin door was opened, not by a gate agent, but by a grim-faced man in a dark suit, flanked by 2 uniformed security officers and a frantic-looking man mopping his brow with a handkerchief. The frantic man was David Lowell, Senior Vice President of Apex Airlines. He scanned the cabin, his eyes landing on the twins in 1A and 1B. He then looked at Beatrice, his expression turning to stone. The trap hadn't just sprung. It had just grounded a Boeing 777. The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute, broken only by the distant muffled sounds of the airport terminal. Every eye was fixed on the tableau at the door. David Lowell sweating in his expensive suit, the airline's head of JFK ground operations looking furious, and 2 security guards standing by, their presence an ominous promise. David Lowell walked down the aisle, his gaze locked on Maya and Jordan. He stopped before their seats and crouched down slightly, bringing himself to their level. His face was a mask of practiced corporate contrition. "Miss Maya Thorne, Miss Jordan Thorne," he began, his voice loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "My name is David Lowell. I am a senior vice president with this airline. On behalf of every single employee of Apex Airlines, I want to offer you our most profound and sincere apology for what you have experienced on this aircraft tonight." He then stood up and turned, his eyes sweeping across the cabin before landing with the force of a physical impact on Beatrice. "Beatrice," he said, his voice now stripped of all warmth. "And you, madam," he added, glancing at a suddenly pale Mrs. Covington. "Please gather your belongings. You will be leaving the aircraft. Now." The reversal was so swift, so total it caused a collective gasp in the cabin. Beatrice's face, already flushed, turned a ghastly white. "Mr. Lowell, I don't understand. These passengers were being disruptive. I was following protocol." "Your protocol involved the targeted humiliation of 2 minors and the children of our most valued corporate partner." David snapped, his voice a low growl. The fiction of corporate niceties was gone. This was raw damage control. "You have caused an international incident, cost this airline a fortune in delays and fuel, and potentially jeopardized a $50 million contract. You did not follow protocol. You followed your own ugly prejudices, and your career with this airline is over. Security will escort you." Beatrice looked as though she'd been struck. Her eyes darted around the cabin, seeking an ally, a witness to this injustice. But she found none. The other passengers, who had been content to watch the drama unfold, now stared at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. They had witnessed the initial aggression, and now they were witnessing the consequence. Mr. Albright, the man from 2D, spoke up again. "For what it's worth, Mr. Lowell," he said calmly, "your flight attendant's account is a complete fabrication. I saw the entire thing. These girls were exemplary. Your employee was the aggressor. David Lowell nodded curtly at him. Thank you for that, sir. We've already been made aware. His gaze returned to Beatrice. Get your things. Don't make this any more difficult than it already is. One of the security guards stepped forward. Ma'am, let's go. Defeated, Beatrice slowly began to gather her small crew bag from the overhead compartment. Her hands trembled, her perfect bun now seeming askew, her uniform suddenly ill-fitting. The authority she had wielded so imperiously just minutes before had evaporated, leaving behind a brittle, terrified woman. Now it was Mrs. Covington's turn. Her face, a monument to expensive cosmetic procedures, was crumbling into a mask of rage and disbelief. You can't be serious. I am a passenger. I've done nothing wrong. I was defending your staff. You chose to involve yourself, madam, David Lowell said icily. You chose to verbally harass other passengers. This is a private aircraft, and the captain, at the request of the airline, has the authority to refuse service to anyone who disrupts the flight. You are a disruption. Leave, or you will be removed. I will sue. My husband is Jonathan Covington. He sits on the board of Cygnus Corp. You will hear from our lawyers, she shrieked, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. The name Cygnus Corp caused a flicker of recognition in David Lowell's eyes, but not the kind she hoped for. Cygnus Corp was a direct and bitter competitor of Helios Logistics, the wife of a rival's board member publicly harassing the CEO's children. This was getting worse by the second. That will be between your husband and your lawyers, David said dismissively. For now, you are getting off this plane. With a final sputtering cry of outrage, Mrs. Covington snatched her designer handbag and stormed up the aisle, nearly tripping in her haste. Beatrice followed, a ghost in an airline uniform, her head bowed in utter humiliation. They were met at the door by the ground operations manager and led away down the jet bridge, not as respected crew and first-class passengers, but as disgraced pariahs. The moment they were gone, a palpable sense of relief washed over the cabin. The young flight attendant, Liam, who had been standing by looking horrified, immediately stepped forward. Can I get you both that orange juice now? He asked Maya and Jordan, his voice filled with genuine kindness. And a new blanket? I'll get you two, and some of the chocolate from the dessert cart. On me. A small, watery smile touched Jordan's lips. Maya nodded, the fight finally draining out of her. Thank you, she said softly. We'd like that. David Lowell oversaw the operation, ensuring the girls were treated like royalty. He offered them gift bags, travel vouchers, a direct line to his office for anything they needed. The captain came out of the cockpit to personally apologize, his face grim with embarrassment. He explained that he had only heard one side of the story from Beatrice and had been in the process of getting the facts when the call from corporate came down like a thunderbolt. This will never happen again on an aircraft I command, he promised them, his eyes sincere. The plane was refueled, new paperwork was filed. The delay would be nearly 3 hours, but no one complained. They had all just witnessed a stunning display of real-time justice, a morality play at 30,000 feet where the bullies were vanquished and the heroes, 2 quiet teenage girls, were vindicated. As the plane finally, truly began its takeoff roll down the runway, Maya and Jordan looked at each other. They were exhausted, emotionally battered, but they were also changed. They had faced down ugliness and had not backed down. They had learned a harsh lesson about the world, but also a powerful one about their own strength and the unwavering, earth-moving love of their father. They sipped their orange juice as the lights of New York City fell away beneath them, feeling not like victims, but like warriors who had just won a very important battle. Karma, as it turned out, was not a gentle creditor. For Beatrice and Mrs. Covington, the bill came due before the wheels of Flight 112 even touched down in London. Their public removal from the aircraft was merely the opening act of a swift and brutal unraveling. For Beatrice, the walk down the jet bridge was a walk of shame. She was not taken to a quiet office for a debrief. Instead, she was escorted directly to a sterile, windowless room in the airport's employee relations department, where the head of HR and an airline lawyer were waiting. The meeting was brutally efficient. She was shown the official complaint filed by David Lowell on behalf of the airline and, more damningly, on behalf of the Thorne family. It cited gross misconduct, endangerment of a minor, and violation of corporate anti-discrimination policies. It also mentioned the statement from the witness, Mr. Albright, which corroborated the twins' story in every detail. "I was stressed," Beatrice pleaded, her voice cracking. "We're understaffed. I made a judgment call." "You made a decision," the HR director corrected her, her voice flat. "You judged 2 paying customers based on their appearance and age. Your judgment was wrong, and it has caused irreparable damage to this company's reputation and finances." She was handed a box to collect her personal items from her locker. Her ID badge was confiscated. Her final paycheck would be mailed. By the time Flight 112 was over the Atlantic, Beatrice was no longer an employee of Apex Airlines. She was a woman in her late 40s, standing on the curb at JFK with a small cardboard box, her 25-year career in aviation erased in less than 2 hours. The next day, she learned the true scope of the disaster. Her name was flagged in the International Airline Employee Database. The reason for termination: involuntary termination for cause related to discrimination complaint. It was a death sentence. No other major carrier would touch her. Her dream of flying until retirement was gone. All that was left was the bitter residue of her own prejudice. The fate of Mrs. Covington was, in its own way, even more dramatic. She had stormed out of the airport, firing off furious texts to her husband, Jonathan Covington, about how she'd been assaulted and disrespected, and how he needed to destroy Apex Airlines. Jonathan Covington, however, was a shrewd businessman. When he heard his wife's hysterical account, he didn't just hear about an airline dispute. He heard key names: Thorne, Helios Logistics. He made a few calls. His blood ran cold. He found his wife in the drawing room of their Upper East Side penthouse, still fuming. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I stood up for standards," she declared. "You publicly harassed and hurled a racist insult at the daughters of Marcus Thorne," he corrected her, his face ashen. "Marcus Thorne, the man whose company, Helios, we have been trying to steal the Amazon drone delivery contract from for 2 years. The man I am supposed to be in a board meeting with next week to discuss a potential merger that would make me chairman." Mrs. Covington's mouth fell open. I didn't know who they were." "That's the point, Charlotte," he roared, his composure finally cracking. "It shouldn't matter who they are. But you, with your petty country club bigotry, you just handed Marcus Thorne a personal nuclear-level weapon to use against me. Against us. I just got off the phone with 2 other board members. The story is already circulating in our circles. Not the tabloid version, but the real one. The one where my wife publicly humiliated the family of our biggest rival. You haven't just embarrassed me. You have committed an act of corporate sabotage." The fallout was catastrophic. The potential merger with Helios was, of course, dead on arrival. The Amazon contract went to Helios a month later, a major victory for Marcus Thorne, who never had to say a word about the incident. The story, as Jonathan predicted, spread like wildfire through their rarefied social and business circles. The Covingtons were toxic. Invitations dried up. Friends stopped returning calls. Charlotte Covington, who had built her entire identity on a foundation of wealth, social standing, and perceived superiority, found that her foundation was made of sand. Her husband, seeing his own career prospects damaged by his association with her, became cold and distant. Within 6 months, he moved out of the penthouse. The day the divorce papers arrived, they were delivered by a courier who looked at her with an expression of complete indifference. Her status, the very thing she had tried to weaponize against 2 teenage girls, was gone. She was just another woman, alone in a room full of expensive things that now felt worthless. Meanwhile, a small, positive ripple was spreading. Mr. Albright, the businessman from 2D, received a personal call a week later. "Mr. Albright, this is Marcus Thorne." Albright was taken aback. "Mr. Thorne, it was my pleasure to do what was right." "Integrity is a rare commodity, sir," Marcus said. "I looked you up. Your firm specializes in sustainable packaging solutions. My company, Helios, is launching a new green logistics initiative. I think my people should talk to your people." That single conversation led to a multi-million-dollar contract for Albright's small company, catapulting it into the major leagues. It was a life-changing reward for a simple act of decency. He had stood up for two strangers, and in doing so, had secured his own future. For Maya and Jordan, the rest of the trip was a whirlwind. They presented their project at the symposium to thunderous applause, winning the coveted Pinnacle Award for innovation. Their father met them in London as promised, his hug at the airport terminal fierce and protective. He never spoke of the rage he felt, but they could see it in the way he watched over them, the way he ensured their every comfort. They didn't talk much about what happened on the plane. They didn't need to. The lesson was etched into their understanding of the world. They returned to New York not as girls, but as young women who had learned that the world contained both casual cruelty and profound strength, often in the same moment. 2 years passed. An international flight incident, no matter how dramatic, is a fleeting thing in the churning 24-hour news cycle. For the world, Apex Flight 112 was a forgotten headline, a momentary spike in social media outrage that had long since flatlined. But for those at its epicenter, the event was not an ending. It was a genesis. It was a single immense pressure point that fractured their lives along pre-existing fault lines, sending them hurtling down paths they could never have foreseen. The consequences were not a simple balancing of scales. They were a profound and ongoing revelation of character, a slow, grinding echo of a choice made in a pressurized cabin miles above the earth. For Maya and Jordan Thorne, the echo was a constant low hum of responsibility. They were thriving at MIT, yet the victory felt more complicated with each passing year. The story had indeed become a quiet legend, but it was a legend that weighed on them. One rainy Tuesday evening in their dorm room, surrounded by textbooks on quantum mechanics and biorobotics, Jordan was scrolling through a news feed on her tablet. Her face suddenly tightened. "Maya, look at this," she said softly. On the screen was an article about a new lawsuit filed against a different airline. A black family, flying coach, had been wrongly accused of theft and removed from a flight. The story was depressingly familiar, but the outcome was not. There was no CEO father, no grounded plane, no swift justice. There was only a GoFundMe for legal fees and a blurry cell phone video that would likely disappear into the digital ether. Maya read over her sister's shoulder, a familiar ache settling in her chest. "It's not fair," she whispered. "No, it's not," Jordan agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "We were lucky, Maya. We weren't just right, we were powerful. Or Dad was. What happens to everyone else?" This was the question that now defined them. The incident had stripped them of the comforting illusion that the world was a meritocracy. They had won their science fairs through brilliance and hard work, but they had won their battle on Flight 112 through a privilege they hadn't earned. It was a sobering, humbling realization. This awareness became the silent engine driving their ambitions. Jordan had thrown herself into the study of AI ethics, focusing her research on creating algorithms free from the implicit biases of their creators. Her senior thesis proposal was titled Coding for Conscience, a new framework for bias-free machine learning. She would spend late nights in the lab, fueled by coffee and a burning memory of Beatrice's sneer, trying to build a world where a machine, at least, could not judge a person by their skin color. It was her way of fighting a million injustices at once, of making their lucky break matter for more than just themselves. Maya, channeling her father's directness, became involved in social entrepreneurship. She used her family's name not for access to parties, but for access to boardrooms. She interned with a venture capital firm that exclusively funded startups founded by women and people of color. She was learning the language of power, not just how to wield it, but how to distribute it. She remembered the feeling of helplessness, the cold dread of being voiceless. Her life's mission now was to hand other people a microphone. The scar from that day remained. Sometimes in a crowded lecture hall, Maya would feel a flash of anxiety, a reflexive scan of the room for judging eyes. Jordan still had moments where a dismissive tone from a professor or stranger would send a jolt of ice through her veins. They never spoke of it as a trauma, but rather as a data point, the single most important piece of evidence in their ongoing experiment of navigating the world. It had forged in them an empathy so profound, it was almost a burden, connecting them to the silent struggles of every person who had ever been told, in 1,000 different ways, "You don't belong here." For Marcus Thorne, the echo was the sound of a promise he had to keep. In his gleaming corner office overlooking the city, Marcus reviewed the quarterly report for the Thorne Apex Initiative for Inclusive Service. The metrics were positive. Incidents of customer complaints related to discrimination were down 60% across the airline. The program was being hailed as a model for the industry. It was a clear success, yet Marcus felt no triumph. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning softly, and his gaze drifted to a framed photo on his desk. It was of Maya and Jordan at age 10, grinning, missing their front teeth, holding up a volcano they'd built for a school science fair. A wave of the same cold fury he'd felt 2 years ago washed over him. He hadn't been there on that plane. He had surrounded his daughters with every advantage, the best schools, travel, resources, believing he was building a fortress around them. But it was a fortress with a fatal flaw. It existed within a world he couldn't control. The initiative wasn't a business decision. It was an act of atonement. It was his way of retroactively fighting the battle he couldn't be there for. Every training module developed, every dollar invested, was a shield he was forging for other people's children. He had grounded a plane, an act of breathtaking power that had become industry lore. But he knew, with a father's chilling certainty, that all his power and wealth had been useless until the moment his daughter's trembling voice had come through the phone. It was a terrifying impotence. This realization had subtly rewired him. He became more ruthless in his business dealings with companies that had poor diversity records and more generous with those who made genuine efforts. He looked at the men on the boards he sat on, men like Jonathan Covington, and saw not just competitors but potential architects of the same pain his family had endured. The incident had given his immense power a new, deeply personal vector. He was no longer just building a logistics empire. He was leveraging its weight to nudge the world, inch by painful inch, into a place that might be worthy of his daughter's brilliance. For Beatrice Peters, the echo was a deafening, unending shriek of her own victimhood. Karma, for Beatrice, was not a sudden lightning strike but a slow, creeping rot. Her new reality was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at a gas station convenience store off the Van Wyck Expressway. The air, thick with the smell of stale coffee, cheap hot dogs, and pine sol, was a universe away from the rarefied scent of cabin-filtered air and warming dinner rolls. The gleaming chrome of the first-class galley was replaced by the sticky, smeared glass of the donut case. She was perpetually exhausted, her face puffy, the crisp lines of her flight attendant uniform replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting polo shirt with a Speedy Mart logo. But the true decay was internal. In the long, quiet hours of the night, as truckers and lonely travelers came and went, her mind would play the events of that flight on a continuous loop. In her version, she was the heroine. She was the guardian of order, the defender of standards against two entitled, aggressive girls who had used their father's power to ruin her. She never once considered her own role. The sneer, the dismissal of their requests, the lie to the captain, these details were erased from her memory, replaced by a self-serving narrative of injustice. The world had conspired against her. One night, a young black woman, a student by the look of her, came in to buy coffee before a long drive. She was polite, smiling, and paid with a credit card from a prestigious university. As Beatrice handed her the change, their eyes met. For a fleeting second, Beatrice was back on the plane, looking at Maya or Jordan. A tremor of something, fear, recognition, a flicker of the truth went through her. But she crushed it instantly, as she always did. She turned away, her face hardening into a familiar mask of resentment. "Have a nice night," the student said cheerfully. Beatrice didn't answer. She just watched the girl leave, a fresh wave of bitterness washing over her. She hated her. She hated her youth, her confidence, her expensive education. She hated her because she represented everything Beatrice had lost, and in her twisted mind, everything that had been stolen from her. Her prison wasn't the gas station. It was the impenetrable fortress of her own bigotry. She was serving a life sentence, and she was her own jailer. For Charlotte Covington, the echo was a profound, soul-crushing silence. Charlotte had not lost her livelihood. She had lost her context. Her entire sense of self had been built on the reflection she saw in other people's envious eyes. Her husband's name, their social standing, the power she wielded at charity galas, these were the pillars of her existence. And in one night, they had all been dynamited. Her new life in the Boca Raton condo complex was a special kind of hell. It was a world of forced, sun-drenched cheerfulness. The women she now encountered at the community pool didn't care about the Covington name or Cygnus Corp. They cared about their grandchildren, their golf handicaps, and the early bird special at the clubhouse. When Charlotte tried to drop hints about her former life, about her penthouse overlooking Central Park or her vacations in Gstaad, they would just nod politely, their eyes glazing over before changing the subject. Her power was gone. Her name was meaningless. She was invisible. For a narcissist, it was a fate worse than poverty. She spent her days endlessly scrolling through the social media feeds of her former friends, a ghost haunting a life that was no longer hers. She saw them at the Met Gala, at benefits in the Hamptons, on yachts in the Mediterranean. Each photo was a fresh stab of the knife. She would sometimes leave bitter, cryptic comments on their posts, which were quickly deleted. Soon she found she was blocked. She had not just been cast out, she had been erased. One afternoon, sitting on her lanai overlooking a perfectly manicured golf course, she saw a man playing with his 2 teenage daughters. He was laughing, showing them how to swing a club. They were adoring, happy. The image was so wholesome, so complete, it pierced through Charlotte's armor of indignation. For a single terrifying moment, she felt the cavernous emptiness of her own life. She had destroyed her marriage, her home, her entire world. Over what? Over a refusal to grant a basic courtesy to 2 girls. The sheer pettiness of it, the monumental stupidity, threatened to crush her. But the moment of clarity was too painful to bear. It was easier to retreat into rage. It wasn't her fault. It was her fool of a husband's fault for not defending her. It was Marcus Thorne's fault for being so vindictive. It was those girls' fault for being in a place they didn't belong. The narrative was her only comfort, her only companion in the suffocating silence. Her karma was to be left utterly alone with the one person she could not stand, herself. The story of Maya and Jordan Thorne is more than just a dramatic tale from 30,000 feet. It's a powerful, real-life reminder that prejudice, whether it's a whispered comment in a first-class cabin or a systemic policy, has a price. The consequences for Beatrice and Mrs. Covington were not random acts of fate. They were the direct results of the choices they made and the ugliness they harbored. This story shows that standing up for yourself, for your dignity, is not being disruptive. It's essential. And it demonstrates the incredible power of a parent's love and the responsibility that comes with influence. Marcus Thorne didn't just fix a problem for his daughters. He used his power to initiate real systemic change. What do you think? Was the response to ground the plane justified? What would you have done in the twin situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and hard karma resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true stories, where the consequences always find their way home.